the good, the bad, and the ugly, while you're still in your own unprocessed trauma. This is hard work. Are you guys hearing me on that? I believe, for the most part, that each generation is trying to do better than the generation before. You do the best you can with what you have until you learn better, you do better.
Hey, I'm Brooke Jean, therapist, recovering perfectionist, and struggling working mom on a mission to normalize normal. If you're an overwhelmed, high-achieving, and secretly anxious mama, struggling to balance it all and on the brink of burnout, you are in the right place. Here is where we talk about hard things like balancing work and family life, mental health, and how to navigate life-altering transitions. Nothing is too taboo here. In my conversations, I'll teach you how to let go of who you think you're supposed to be in order to create the life you've always wanted. Get ready to embrace your messy, shed the shoulds, and find freedom through a life unperfected. This is the Unperfected Pod.
Welcome back to the Unperfected Pod, where we normalize normal and find freedom through a life unperfected. What is up, you guys? This is Brooke Jean. I am your host, and I am so excited to be back on the mic with you today. I am a therapist, I'm a coach, I'm a consultant, but mostly I am a high-achieving, highly anxious, busy, overwhelmed, working mama just like you, struggling to navigate this messy thing called life. And here on this podcast, I hope that I am teaching you some things about mental health and just motherhood and the transition of motherhood, but also just making you feel less alone by putting some of the struggles that not only I am having out there, but the guests are having as well. Because doing this thing, right, raising these humans, this is not an easy job to do, but it's also the most important one we have. So today I want to get into a topic that is definitely one of what feels like the messiest parts of motherhood, but I do want to normalize that shiz, which is triggers. Triggers. So today we're going to talk about, first of all, what are triggers? How do I know when I'm triggered? Secondly, what is actually happening in the brain and body when I am triggered? And third, what the heck do I do to help myself? A lot of times I hear moms share stories about how bad they feel because their children trigger them. And we internalize that and think that it's because we're wrong or bad or too sensitive or poor parents, and there's something wrong with us that we're so triggered easily by our children. And I am here to tell you, it is a common and normal part of parenting, especially our generation who is trying to break intergenerational trauma. So we are trying to heal our own trauma while learning to do things different. Right? Our generation of moms has all this information around psychology and nervous systems and brains and mental health and emotional well-being that our parents and our parents' parents and past generations didn't have. And so it is really hard being the generation of parent who is kind of holding in one hand all of the things that you went through growing up that were potentially fucked up while also trying to do better for your children. So we are basically a walking, living, live wire trying to parent. And then guess what? We forget that we are humans having human experiences, which is why we get triggered, which is why we act out, lash out, yell at our kids. And instead of showing ourselves grace and space and doing our healing work, what do? We shame the living daylights out of ourselves and tell ourselves that we're terrible. And so I think it's really important to talk about triggers so we can normalize them, we can stop shaming ourselves, and we can get busy doing the work that we can do to help ourselves along the way. So let's get into it. How do you know you're triggered? What are triggers? I want to paint a picture for you. Okay, it's 8:00 at night, maybe on a Friday night. It's been a long week of juggling all the things. We're burnt out, we're tired, we're touched out, the noises are getting louder, The children's fighting is becoming almost too much to bear. At this point, we have been overstimulated for so long, we don't even know what it feels like to be calm and grounded and resourced and regulated. And one of our kiddos has a meltdown before bed, or is really pushing back on the bedtime routine, or isn't getting to bed. And you can feel yourself escalating, but all of a sudden there's a particular whine, a particular noise that comes out of your child's mouth that sends you over the limit, and you lose control, and you either shout at them or walk away or slam a door or internalize that pain and start really self-criticizing. But it feels like an out-of-body experience where you just completely lose your shit. That's an example of being triggered. Anytime we have a subconscious reactive response to something that almost surprises you a little bit, you're triggered. Well, let me reframe that, because we all have trauma, and with that trauma comes shame. So we all have shame. So anytime that there's an indication of embarrassment or shame, that could send you into a triggered state. Loud noises, or not seeing someone come in your room and they startle you and you jump really hard and it really kind of scares the shit out of you, that's a trigger. Watching something on TV and then suddenly you feel paralyzed and can't move for 2 hours and you're in an absolute frozen response, that could be triggered. Being around someone else's trauma and getting that secondary or vicarious trauma and feeling like you either need to fight or run or freeze or completely shut down. So there's a lot of different ways that being triggered shows up for all of us. It looks different for each of us because we all have different experiences that created those triggers in the first place. So where do these triggers come from? How do we develop triggers? And what is actually happening in our brain and body? I think it's important here to do a little bit of psychoeducation around trauma. And trauma is a very important topic. It's very complex. We are still just scratching the surface and understanding what's happening in the brain and body with trauma. So there might be research coming out today that is, showing us something different than what I'm saying. But from where I'm at professionally and the training that I've had up to this point, and then my own lived experience in healing, and then the things that I see in the office every day with the clients, we all have experiences that at some point in our lives shook us to our core. It could have been abuse, it could have been a car accident, but it also could have been humiliation. It could have just been something really scary. And at that time in our development, it was too much for our precious brains and bodies to process. So we have this moment where everything pauses. We kind of leave our body for a minute. Our brain and our amygdala starts assessing the level of danger. Depending on the level of threat and danger it perceives, it's going to send a message through the vagus nerve to fire up either the parasympathetic or the sympathetic nervous system. And if it's a threat and it's a danger, it's going to fire up the sympathetic nervous system, which is going to then dump a bunch of adrenaline, cortisol, and things like that through our adrenals, through our nervous system. And now we are in either a fight, flight, freeze, or fawn response. And all of this can happen within seconds. So you see, my friends, we always have stimuli coming at us. Sights, sounds, textures, and we have receptors. Okay, I think we have something like 14 million receptors that are receiving stimuli and information coming in. 11 million of them are our eyes. So most of the information, the stimulation and the stuff is coming through our retina, which then that information travels through our optic nerve to the amygdala. The amygdala is the alarm center, determines the threat, and then it sends the alarm through the vagus nerve to the nervous system to then fire up the engine. in. Fight, flight, freeze, or shut down. So you can just be living your life and there's some sort of sound that comes out you sideways, or a bang or a pop, and that messaging, that information is going to come in through our receptors, our amygdala. And here's the thing about our brains. Our brains love to categorize things. So our brain hears that pop and it associates that same pop with a trauma memory that we have stuck in our brain and body from a pop that was a traumatic experience. But it can also be a tone. Somebody's tone can trigger you because your brain is going, that's the same tone as my father who was mean and abusive or critical of me, or a mother who was, neglectful or critical of me, or a coach who was verbally abusive of me, or an ex who was narcissistic and abusive towards me. It can be a smell. It could be a song. It could be a body sensation that comes over you. But what I want you to understand is growing up, we all experience these moments that can be traumatic where everything pauses in time. It's too much for our little brain and body to handle. Our amygdala determines it is traumatic and we enter into a fight, flight, freeze, or shut down. And then that traumatic experience gets stored in the body. And that file, that memory does not travel to the rest of it does not travel to the part of the brain where your everyday regular memories are stored. It gets stuck in the emotional brain. I think we're still uncovering where exactly it gets stuck. We know it gets stuck in the limbic system, right? Where that amygdala and all that is. So you now have a traumatic experience stuck in your emotional brain. Okay, this is where our amygdala starts becoming overactive and maybe even a little sensitive, maybe even a little hypervigilant. The more trauma, the more it's gonna perceive things as traumatic. And the more trauma, the more those memories are stuck and stored in your body. So we are basically, when I say we're all just walking around a bunch of live wires, that's why. We all have a bunch of trauma stuck in our midbrains, in our limbic systems, in our emotional part of our brain that's looking for more danger to come in, with a bunch of dysregulated nervous systems that are constantly firing fight, flight, freeze, and shut down because we're not getting the trauma out of the body. So there's a couple amazing bodies of work that I want to share with you if you want to learn more about this. So the book, The Body Keeps the Score, is really good at explaining this. There's another book that I love called Waking the Tiger. And then there's the book that I most recently read around trauma, which is The Myth of Normal by Dr. Gabor Mate. If you want to understand what the hell is happening in your body as it relates to trauma, those are 3 great places to start. But what happens is this stimuli is coming in through our receptors, and it is firing up our amygdala and firing up our nervous system and sending us into a triggered response. So a trigger is simply your body has associated this new information coming in with a traumatic memory or experience, and it's lumped them together, and your body and your mind are going to respond as if it was the original trauma. Let that absorb for a minute, because I know this is kind of high level psychology talk, so I apologize if it's a lot. I think it's important that we understand what's going on in our brain and bodies when we're triggered, so you can stop blaming yourself. Like, you're getting triggered, you're losing your shit with your kids because your brain and body is doing what it's supposed to do. It's designed to protect you. It sees that shrill that your kiddo does, and it takes you back to a time when you heard that from your sibling, or you voiced that and no one came, or you voiced that because someone hurt you. So your trigger is just your body keeping the score. It's your body remembering. Okay? And so with this knowledge, at least be a little bit more gentle with ourselves when we experience triggers. Now, we do have a responsibility, my loves, to heal ourselves and to be able to manage them in a healthier way, which we'll get to here in this podcast. we do have a responsibility. We don't just want to keep walking around as a live wire. We don't want to keep walking around triggered and lashing out or lashing in. We don't want to walk around projecting onto each other. You see, all of this, like the disagreements and the drama that I see on social media or out in the real world are just projections of each other's shit. We're flinging our poo at each other and wanting to blame someone else. So yes, when we do our own work, not only are we going to feel better in our brain and body, but we're going to show up not in a triggered state, but in a more grounded, adult-like, present state. It's going to be easier for us to stay present and be in our right mind when we do this work. And then there's a ripple effect, on our relationships, on our communities, and in healing the people on the planet at large. So this is powerful stuff. But most of us just don't even have this awareness. We don't know these things. We aren't taught these things. And we're walking around on edge, just waiting for that next tone, look, email, scream from our kids, pushback from our team or our boss or our partner, loud sound. We're just waiting for that next thing to completely tip us over. So if you find yourself triggered, I want to tell you, it's because you have reason to be. And this understanding of the brain and body, I'm hoping, will help you take the blame and shame off of it. Because when we blame and shame ourselves after getting triggered, we don't actually get to the resolve. Not within ourselves or the people that we're maybe being triggered at or with or whatever. So that's what's happening in the brain and body when we get triggered. And it can feel like lashing out. It can feel like lashing in. It can feel like being really startled and scared. It can feel like being frozen and paralyzed in fear. It can feel like shutting down into a depression for 2 days and not wanting to eat or sleep or anything. That's fun. It can look like picking a fight with your partner. It can look like raising your voice with your children. It can look like slamming the laundry down on the floor. For me, when I get triggered, I lash out I lash out and then I shame the living shit out of myself and lash in forever afterwards. But I feel like this rush of heat come over my body, this tingling. I almost have like an out of body experience. And then I throw like a tantrum like a little child, whether it is like walking away and shaking my head and saying something really negative under my breath, or slamming the laundry down, or whatever, like, especially when it's a big one and I don't have the awareness, that's what that looks like, or even raising my voice. When I have some awareness, I can walk away and start grounding and breathing, and that usually looks and feels a little bit better. But that's what it looks like for me. But I also get really startled. Like sometimes I'll be in bed and I'll be like facing away from the door and my husband looking at my phone, and my husband will like sneak in and it'll startle me to the point where my entire body jumps. And then I'm in a serious low-key panic for like a couple hours, where I'm trying to regulate my nervous system because now I'm completely dysregulated. My insides are shaking. My thoughts are racing. My heart is pounding. And it was my husband, and I knew it was safe, but my body had a response that startled me, that now I have to spend the next 2 hours calming myself down, regulating my nervous system so I can go to sleep. And sometimes we don't really know where these triggers come from. You don't necessarily have to remember all your trauma to then identify why these things trigger you in order to heal it, right? So with some of my triggers, I do know where they come from. Like some of the shame and embarrassment ones, but the like being startled like that, I don't know where that comes from. I don't have a memory of being startled like that, or anyone sneaking up on me as a child like that. But a lot of times we don't remember our trauma memories either. But it's important to know, a lot of people want to get to the bottom of everything. And while I think self-awareness is beautiful and understanding ourselves is so healing and therapeutic, sometimes we have triggers and we don't know where they come from, and that's okay. You can still heal it, okay? So the first thing I want you to do is get out of shame and blame that you're a person who gets triggered. Okay? Have some freaking compassion for yourself that you've been through some things that are stuck in your brain and body that make you sensitive to this information coming in. Let's have some compassion. Okay? If it were someone else, I know that you would be able to extend that compassion. And then number 2, let's just start to build some self-awareness around what are the triggers. When do I feel triggered? Is it when my kids fight? Is it when they whine? Is it when they push back? Is it when my partner ignores me or doesn't respond to me right away? Is it a tone that my partner takes? Is it a tone in an email from my supervisor? Is it when things don't go my way? Is it when I think I'm fucking up? Is it when anything embarrassing or shameful or getting feedback or, anything that's telling me that I could be a better person triggers me and cuts me deep? Just begin to get curious from a loving and compassionate place. What are my triggers? Like, I can handle so much pushback from my daughter until I can't fucking handle it. And then all of a sudden, I lose my cool, I raise my voice, and I'm in a different league at that point. And it's just the constant stimulation and pushback and pushback and pushback and disrespect that just gets you to that point, right? So get to know your triggers. Write them down. Get curious about them and show yourself some self-compassion, because this is beautiful, my love, that you're even starting to look at this shit. How many parents go their whole entire lives and never look at themselves and never try to be better or do better, or never repair and apologize after they yell at their kids, or don't even feel bad about spanking them, or don't even feel bad about humiliating them in front of their friends? There's a lot of parents that go their entire lifetimes without any of this awareness. So the fact that you're even listening to this podcast and you're even looking at your triggers and you're willing to do the work, you're an amazing parent because of that. That is a beautiful place to start. And let's build from there. I'm here to help you. I'm also a work in progress, y'all. I have not arrived. I am a therapist and I yell sometimes. I am working on it though, and I will repair every time, which we'll get to with what you can do when you get triggered. So we talked a little bit about where triggers come from, trauma, the body's keeping the score. We talked a little bit about how it might show up for you. We talked a little bit about what's happening in the brain and body when you're triggered. And so let me get into what we can do. There was one thing that I wanted to share before I get into what we can do to help ourselves with our triggers. Some other things that I have noticed trigger parents, and I'm sharing this so you don't feel alone, you don't feel ashamed or bad or, broken. Sometimes we get triggered when our kids get what we didn't have growing up, right? So if our kids have the safety we didn't have, if our kids have the emotional availability of parents that we didn't have, if our kids have the luxuries that we didn't have, if our kids have the audacity to use their beautiful voices and share with us what they think, but we were not allowed to do that growing up. If our kids feel comfortable melting down around us and we never felt we could melt down around our parents, right? So a lot of times people think we're just raising kids that are going to grow up and be terrible and entitled because, we're doing gentle parenting and we are focused on attachment-based parenting and we're letting our kids kind of be who they are and we are doing time-ins instead of time-outs, whatever it is that, maybe you're doing or not doing, or maybe you're judging or not judging. I want to say this. We are creating safer environments for our kids to be themselves, and that comes with them acting their age and melting down because they can't communicate. And that comes with us trying to put our shit aside so we can nurture them and love them and provide that secure attachment. And while it may seem like we're raising brats or entitled kids or whatever, I promise you that style of parenting is going to lead to a healthier human than the kiddos that were not allowed to speak their mind, that were not allowed to share their emotions and repressed them, right? That's how we end up having a bunch of adult bullies running this freaking country. That's how we ended up having a bunch of bullies in the patriarchy and running our organizations. That's how we have a bunch of ding-dongs in the boardroom fighting each other and people on the HOA gossiping, right? All of that is people's unprocessed nonsense that they're taking out on each other and us because their attachment wasn't strong and their trauma wasn't tended to and their feelings were stuffed down that later became aggression or illness or whatever it is. So this parenting that we're doing is hard because we're trying to lean in instead of leaning out. But gosh damn, it's triggering. But we are doing it right, my loves. And I'm not saying one style of parenting is right because there is no right. We're all figuring this out. I'm just saying that it's going to be triggering that you're trying to create safe spaces for your kids to be themselves, the good, the bad, and the ugly, while you're still in your own unprocessed trauma. This is hard work. Are you guys hearing me on that? I believe, for the most part, that each generation is trying to do better than the generation before. You know, you do the best you can with what you have until you learn better, you do better, right? So now that we're learning about psychology and nervous system and trauma and the brain, you see so many parents trying to meet and exceed their children's needs as it relates to brain stuff and emotional health and all of these things. And we're trying to figure it out as we go. And we're not doing it perfectly, but we're trying, and that's a beautiful thing. But when your kid has something that you didn't have growing up, that can be a trigger. You know, like I look at, you know, like my husband, for example, is very involved, you know, because I've been holding him accountable, honey, to being involved since day one. So he wipes the butts and the tears and has since day one. Now, do I still do more at the end of the day because I'm mom? Yep, I do. But we're always trying to renegotiate that. And I do think more dads in the world need to step up from the beginning and tend to kids' emotional needs and help mom with the emotional labor and with the kids and the home and all the things. But my husband's relationship with his daughter is so close. It's very emotionally attuned. It's very safe. He pays attention to things that, you know, my dad was busy working his ass off 7 days a week. I didn't have the same emotional attention from my dad. Now, I'm not here to blame my dad. My dad was doing the best he could to provide for his family. And in that generation, that's what they did, right? The dads went to work and the moms stayed home with the kids. So this is not about pointing the finger and blaming, but this is for me to say, when my husband attunes to my daughter's emotional needs, not only better than he attunes to mine, thank you very much, but better than I got from my dad, that triggers me. That triggers me. And so there's a part of me, my inner little girl, that gets sad and jealous of that. But I'm aware of it. So I know when it's happening and I take a step back and I do my breathing and I get back into my adult self. And then I remind myself how beautiful it is that my daughter has this relationship with her father and how maybe she won't have an eating disorder like I had or date pieces of shit like I did or, you know, drink too much like I have and do all the things that I did to self-destruct to deal with my shit. I'm not saying my shit is because of my emotional connection to my dad. That is like one teeny tiny piece of a very complex puzzle. I'm saying when our daughters have emotional connection and support from their fathers, that is going to lead to some beautiful outcomes. Maybe they have more sense of self-worth. Maybe they have higher standards when they're choosing a partner. Maybe they're better communicators and feel more safe being vulnerable and expressing themselves and asking for what they need. Maybe they're better partners to their partners. Maybe they're better parents. So by showing up for our children in this way and attuning to them emotionally, I do believe there's a ripple effect that's really powerful and healing and beautiful. And that's all I want, is for our children to have it a little less hard, right? Because we all grew up and then took a look back and said, what the hell was that? Are we okay here? No, we're not. And here's the ways that I'm dealing with it. And here's the ways that I'm coping with it. Time for me to get into therapy and work on these things. If I have one less reason for my son or daughter to go to therapy, y'all, I am winning. We are winning. So all that to say, you might be triggered when your kid has what you didn't have, even though intellectually you're so glad they do. I am so glad my daughter has this relationship with her father. I am so glad I'm able to provide for my kids and that they have these luxuries and safeties and beautiful things. I am so glad that I know to let my children become who they are and let them blossom and just support them in the blossoming. I'm so glad that I have the privilege to get the therapy to do the work to make myself better so they have a better childhood, even though I'm a work in progress, right? So even though intellectually and in my adult self, I am so glad for these things, there's a part of us that's triggered because they have maybe what we didn't have growing up. So I just want to say that out loud because, again, I don't want you shaming yourself and blaming yourself and telling yourself you're a terrible person because you have that thought or that feeling. It's just a part of you. And when we get triggered, it's a beautiful kind of raising of a flag of an area inside of you that needs some love and attention and maybe even healing. So we're not going to be critical of this anymore, but we are going to build more awareness around our triggers so we can start to heal the parts that need to be healed and do the work that we can do to make this easier for ourselves and the people that we relate to and engage with. So what can we do to help ourselves as it relates to triggers? Number one, we need to make sure our basic needs are met. How many of you out there, mamas, forget to feed yourself, haven't had good sleep in 2 years, haven't had a shower today, haven't shaved your legs in a year? Like, you're just feeling deprived of basic fucking needs. That's a problem. That makes us more vulnerable to triggers. So we need nourishment, we need hydration, we need sleep, we need play, we need sunlight. Like, you need to make sure that your needs, those basic needs, that we're safe, okay? If those needs are not being met, we are more vulnerable to triggers. How many of you, when you didn't sleep last night, you're going to lose your cool with your children a little bit easier? Or when you're not taking care of yourself and your hygiene, you get really insecure and maybe totally shut down and really start doubting yourself and your abilities, and then you go into hibernation mode. Or you've abandoned your needs for so long, you're falling into a depression, or whatever it might be, y'all. We have to take care of ourselves. We have to take care of ourselves. So if you haven't right now, I want you to freaking take a sip of water. I'll do it with ya. Take a sip of water. Take a deep breath. And check in on your basic needs. How's your sleep? How's your food? How's your relationship? Do you feel safe and secure? Have you showered? I mean, not saying you have to shower every day, because Lord knows I don't. But you know what I mean. It's not about showering and getting ready every day. It's about not letting yourself get to that point where you feel like such a fucking beast, you don't even know who you are anymore. And that affects the way that you show up in the world. I know you know what I mean, ladies. I know you know what I mean. It's when it's day 4 and we haven't showered and our leg hairs are like tugging at the sheets in the bed and we stink and we feel like greasy and dirty, and that starts to affect our mental health, right? That's what I'm talking about. Anywho, step number 1 is take care of your basic needs. Otherwise, we're going to be more vulnerable to triggers. Number 2, we got to regulate that nervous system, honey. We need to regulate our nervous system proactively and reactively. So if you haven't already, go back to episode 6 on the podcast, which I believe is called Taming Your Anxiety by Tending to Your Nervous System. That whole episode is about how to tame and tend to your nervous system. So these triggers are being acted out through our nervous system. And so we have to do things to regulate our nervous system. When we do it proactively, like when we have a meditation practice, we do breath work regularly, we get outside and do 20 minutes of movement every day, we do all those things. If we're doing those proactively, we're going to have a better baseline for our nervous system, meaning that stimulation that comes in isn't going to have as fighting of a chance to trigger us. We're priming our nervous system through these self-care habits and rituals to be able to handle the triggers better without even trying. So this is your loving reminder to meditate, to focus on your breath, and to move your body 20 minutes a day to close that stress cycle. If you move your body 20 minutes a day, and it can just be a walk, you're going to be moving the excess anxiety, energy, and stress out of your body. Because the more that stays inside and piles up, right? Think of it. You're climbing to the top. You're climbing to the top. Your cup is getting full. And then that one thing, your child's tone, is the thing that tips you over. So we want to proactively flush that shit out of our brain and body. Okay? Regulate your nervous system. You can also do it in the moment. So once you notice that you're triggered because maybe you're raising your voice, or maybe you feel a flood of cortisol dumping through your brain and body, maybe you feel fuzzy, or maybe you go black, or maybe your stomach gets nauseous, whatever your warning signs are, that is your indication to step away from the trigger and ground and resource yourself right then and there. That means you walk away from a conversation. That means you go into the bathroom and you lock the door and you do box breathing. Inhale to 4, hold for 4, exhale for 4, hold for 4, for 3 minutes or until you calm down. Or you go outside and you lay in the grass, or you go walk around the block, or you go turn on a song and dance, or you cry, or you journal, or you call your mom or a friend. But you exit and you regulate. And then your rational brain will come back online, because that's something interesting that happens in the brain when we do get triggered. Once that amygdala determines this is an actual threat or a danger, and we do need some version of a fight, flight, freeze, or fawn response, at that point we are in a trauma response, a body response, a surviving response, and our rational brain, that prefrontal cortex, the rational thinking, problem-solving brain, goes offline. This is why we yell at our kids. We know rationally that we don't want to yell at our children. We don't want to scare our children. We don't want to harm our children. But that rational brain goes offline and you are in a body trauma response. You are in a physical reaction. So we have to regulate our nervous system to get that rational brain back online, because then we can figure out what the next steps are that we need to take, whether it is going back to that conversation, repairing because you yelled at your children, trying again, apologizing, figuring out what caused the triggers so you can do the work to help yourself, problem solving whatever needs to be problem solved to help you reduce the overwhelm. But we have to regulate the nervous system to get that rational brain back online. So I am huge on doing things that are going to regulate the nervous system, both proactively through your self-care habits and rituals, and then in the moment is going to be really important too. Like sometimes, guys, for some reason, I get really overstimulated in the car. It's like the music is playing, you're paying attention to everyone on the road, and my daughter never stops talking. Like, she's a smart girl and she has a lot to say, and I think it's effing amazing. But in the car, can we please shut the beep up? No, we can't. Okay, so the car is where I suddenly find myself totally overstimulated and triggered. And it's in that moment that I will literally turn the music off and I will take a deep breath and I will ask my daughter, sweetheart, mommy's brain is in overdrive. Can we have quiet time for a couple of minutes so I can catch my breath and calm down? and my brain can work well again. And she started to she knows what to do now because I've said that so many times that she starts to understand, oh, mommy's brain is in overwhelm. We all need to calm down. We all need to take a breath. Let's have some quiet time. And it's okay to ask for that because I know in that moment I'm triggered. I need to regulate, but I have nowhere I can effing go because I'm stuck in the car. So I ask for what I need and then I turn off the noises and I just start deep breathing and deep breathing and deep breathing. And then I say to my daughter, because part of that repair is acknowledging what happened and going back and revisiting and explaining it and say, okay, sweetheart, thank you so much for that. Mommy was able to catch her breath. My brain was able to slow down. I feel like myself again. Was there something you were trying to tell mommy before I had to press pause? And of course, Chloe's like, yeah, okay, let me get back into it. Until the next meltdown, right? So step away, or even if you can't step away, take that time to regulate. The other thing I want to talk about is just the vagus nerve. So the vagus nerve is the biggest nerve running from your head to your digestive tract, where, your amygdala sends the message of what is needed in a trauma response through that vagus nerve. And because of our posture and our unhealthy habits and lifestyles, we've really messed with the health of our vagus nerve. So there's some things you can do to condition and strengthen and tone your vagus nerve. So that way it is a channel, it's an effective and functioning channel of communication. And so things like gargling, singing, belly breathing, there's vagal stretches and toning that you can do. All of that is going to help you ensure that your vagus nerve is functioning properly, which is going to help you preventatively and reactively when you're triggered. Okay. And there's a ton of information about that. Like I just took a course from Daily OM on your vagus nerve, where there was like a bunch of different stretches I'm learning to do to tone my vagus nerve. I think it was like $25. I recommend it. It's amazing. So we have to regulate our nervous system. We have to condition and tone and strengthen our vagal nerve. And we also, the first thing I shared was we got to make sure our basic needs are met. And the last one I want to share is we got to do our healing work, my loves. We all are not getting out of this life unscathed. We all have trauma, whether you realize it or not. We all have bodies that are keeping the score. We all have stuck energy in the body that shows up as anxiety, depression, autoimmune disease, IBS, all this shit. We need to heal the brain and heal the body. And my favorite therapies for this work is brain spotting and EMDR, which we offer in my practice. All the links to contact us are in the show notes. Reach out if you're ready to start your healing journey. But I also love somatic experiencing. So I believe the top 3 trauma therapies are brain spotting, EMDR, and somatic experiencing because they're brain body based. What's happening in the brain is also happening in the body. So we cannot ignore the body. The body remembers. We can't just talk it through. Talking is better than nothing, but often that trauma is stuck deeper than where language lives, right? It's in that limbic system and it's imprinted in the body. So we want to do that body work to release that trauma. And the more deeper healing that you do, the less triggered you will become. But let me just remind you, all this to say, my loves, all of us get triggered. Our children trigger us. It doesn't make us bad moms. It's a part of the human existence. You lived through traumatic experiences that made you susceptible to these triggers. You understand now what's happening in your brain and body when you are triggered. And you have 4 steps you can take to help yourself. Because the more regulated we become as mothers, the better parents we can be. I've been reading some studies and just some information lately that have been saying that a mother's or a primary caregiver's regulated nervous system is more important to a child's health than anything else. Their nutrition, their school, all these other things that we just obsess over and fixate on. A mother's regulated nervous system or a primary caregiver's regulated nervous system has the biggest effect on these children. So my loves, while we normalize being triggered, while we allow ourselves to be unperfected and a work in progress, we do our work. So that way we can make our kids feel safe and seen, and they can become healthy, loving adults who love themselves, therefore they can love each other. So that is my message for you today, Mama. I hope you found something in here that can help you in such beautiful and meaningful ways. And like always, I will see you same time, same place next week. Bye for now. Thank you so much for listening to the Unperfected Pod. I hope this episode helped you feel a little less alone and a little more inspired to be you. If you like what we're doing here, I would so appreciate that you subscribe, rate, and review this podcast. If you do, share the episode on Instagram and tag me at BrookeJeanUnperfected to enter to win a 1-to-1 laser coaching session. Also, feel free to join me in my private Facebook community, Mommy's Mental Health Matters, where we continue the conversation. Thanks again for being here, and see you in next week's episode.